about inheritance tax, because Norman Lamont, the former chancellor, has been saying that this proposal or thought or test balloon or whatever it is to cut inheritance tax, that is something that Conservatives have thought about for a long time. We've heard this a number of times, and actually Lord Lamont, whose budget helped John Major win the 1992 election, of course we've got to remember he oversaw Black Wednesday as well, he says that Rishi Sunak should prioritise cutting income tax over inheritance tax to revive Conservative fortunes. Do you think that would work? Do you think it's a good idea? Luke, what's your thought on this?
Well, of course, most of us are simply not rich enough to ever have to pay inheritance tax. It affects a very small number of people are. It is, and the people who are, but the people who are likely to end up paying it are people who don't know enough about the system to avoid it. It is a system that it is a tax that you can avoid, and those who are rich enough will probably be advised out of paying it. So there is, and actually I looked at the polling on this. The British public do not like inheritance tax. The majority want it abolished. And the majority think that it effectively represents double taxation. So why
do you think that people think that a tax that the vast majority of people won't pay, they want to get rid of it? Is this the sort of almost an American idea where they say if you earn $1 million a year you'll be taxed heavily, and people say, oh, I don't want that, even though most people won't, but they might someday?
I think it's interesting that people intuitively reject the idea that people should be taxed twice. So the most popular reason for rejecting it was that you've paid tax throughout your life, you should not be then taxed again when you die. And then the second most popular reason being that, you know, people want to be able to pass things on to their loved ones, and people want people to be rewarded for hard work. And I do think, you know, Norman Lamont's probably right that the income tax burden that people pay at the moment when they're earning, say, just over £100,000 is quite extreme in this country. It's why we are probably losing quite a lot of people to places like Dubai where they pay very little tax or no tax at all. He's probably right that income tax ought to be a bigger issue, but this is a big issue for the British public. Look, my view is that there is scope for reviewing our tax brackets and encouraging entrepreneurship, lowering the corporation tax burden, and then having a serious conversation about what exactly we're doing with all this tax. Because one thing that sort of sits at the end of this discussion is the poor performance of the British economy. It's all very well having an extremely high tax burden, but if we're ignoring the fact that the British economy has had stagnant growth, we're predicting stagnant growth for next year, productivity has been low for decades now, we really haven't had that more difficult conversation about what this tax is doing, what the tax burden is for, what we are stimulating with the tax burden, or what we are putting people off doing. We really had to have this tax conversation as part of a broader discussion about what the British economy does and how well or otherwise it does it. And if we don't do that, then I think all these conversations about which tax to cut or which tax not to cut are going to be largely for the birds.
Jonathan?
I think that there's a really important conversation to be had about income tax, and I think it's really important to kind of cast our minds back to the 1970s, where there was something called the Rooker-Wise Amendment, which was a sort of Labour backbench plan, which made it into law, which actually forced the thresholds to rise with inflation. Because that seemed like a completely fair thing to do, and that is actually kind of that has sort of cross-party appeal if you think about it, because it's not a left-wing idea that says that poorer people should pay more tax. I don't see that as progressive. I think it's much more progressive when you make the people with the heaviest, the widest shoulders pay the most tax, and that's why I think that we should, you know, if you're looking to ways to fund public services, you know, have more windfall taxes, have sort of higher corporation tax, have a financial transaction tax, have, you know, a wealth tax for people who can pay. Obviously, we know that some people are sort of cash poor and asset rich, etc. But there are ways of spreading the burden more fairly than dragging more people into income tax brackets. So I think that it's completely wrong that the personal allowance is frozen for 7 years, for example, because in particular when you have inflation that's been as high as 10%, you'll have far more people who are the lowest paid paying tax at all, and then obviously, you know, the slightly higher end of that, more people being dragged into the second tax bracket, which is again being frozen. So I think that I don't think that there will be much scope for tax cuts, because what I suspect will happen is that Sunak and Hunt are planning a kind of a giveaway budget, which is going to be completely undeliverable, but they'll never have to show they can deliver it, because then they'll call an election possibly for 2nd of May, because we know that the
numbers, Labour will have to respond to what they put forward.
The numbers seem... Look, I'm not obviously a psychic and I don't know what's happening inside Rishi Sunak's mind, but it's possible that because they're planning the election on 6th of March, they'll present this giveaway budget of slashing...
6th of March.
Budget 6th of March, slashing inheritance tax, and maybe something to do with income tax, and then taking that to British people for the 2nd of May. But the point is that you can make these sort of plans, but actually I don't think that the economy is any fit state to be offering tax cuts when public services are in the state they're in, and the economy is completely on its knees.
Still very, very high taxes. Thank you both very, very much indeed. Luke Gittos there, who's lawyer at Murray Human, solicitors, writer for Spiked Online. Thanks for coming in. And Jonathon Lis, who's a political commentator. Much appreciated.